We're very excited to see so many of you coming to join our monthly, mostly monthly, sometimes semi-monthly Resilient Speaker Series. First, I want to say, since I know many of you will ask, that we will provide a copy of the slides in the chat. Also, if you would like a certificate of attendance, you'll find a link to that once you complete the evaluation. We'll provide a link to the evaluation toward the end of today's program. Also, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat or continue doing that. Feel free to add any questions you may have in the chat. We'll address those at the end of the presentation. My name is Wallace Dixon, and I serve as the founding director of the ETSU Strong Brain Institute. I've since passed the torch to Dr. Angela Hageman, who's on this call, who now serves as in the interim director role, I haven't said that before, who now serves in the interim director role. Now in its 6th year, the Strong Brain Institute works to apply the science of childhood adversity to prevent and mitigate the negative impacts of adverse childhood experiences on both children and adults. We also strive to promote awareness and adoption of resilience-informed practices and policies across ETSU and throughout the Appalachian Highlands region. One of the ways that we advance these objectives is through information dissemination, most notably via our speaker series platform. Today, we're proud to present to you our 37th speaker series presentation since its inception. Today, I'm honored to host Dr. Laura Trull and team. Because of the persistence of a few graduate students, one of whom is mine, Jessica, who were eager for SOTL research experience, and SOTL is an acronym for Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. As a result of that persistence, the ETSU Center for Teaching Excellence formed a second graduate co-op for 24-26 alongside their faculty scholars co-op. This group of graduate student scholars from psychology and public health, in collaboration with faculty led by Laura Hunt Trull from social work, has spent the last year plus studying trauma-informed teaching. They're here to share with us their process and findings. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Trull.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I see I am among my people here. I've got some social work faculty on here, and you can take the girl out of Jersey, but you can't take the Jersey out the girl. So I saw somebody from New Jersey, and to which that is my original home state. So thank you all again for being here and joining us today. I'd like to introduce our team. This is an avatar of us. We did our best. That's pretty much what we look like. Originally, in the beginning of this, we also were joined by Ashley Shook, who is a graduate assistant in the College of Education. Unfortunately, she did have to step away from our cohort, but we are a bunch of scholars who are interested in just the scholarship of teaching and learning. Most of us do have a teaching role here at ETSU, either as faculty or as graduate assistants. And so we have been studying trauma-informed teaching over this past year. And so for today, we are going to be telling you about it. So our purpose, in this past fall, we implemented some trauma-informed teaching methods in courses that were taught, and we had some comparison courses as well, so we could see if any of these methods were effective in helping students feel more motivated, feel more successful. And so we're going to share today how those methods may have impacted their motivation and that perception of the learning environment. So I will hand it to my colleague, Norbert.
Thank you, Dr. Trull, and thank you everyone for having me. As a bit of an introduction, motivational climate simply means how teaching practices and classroom environments influence students' desire to learn. And the next thing that comes to mind is, why does this really matter? Of course, we've seen that teaching strategies and of course relationships instructors and students build students' experiential learning. And in the whole, this motivates how students perceive their classroom. We also know that the goal of most of our instructors, or every instructor, is to impact knowledge. However, we also believe that it's very important that as instructors, we create conducive environments that foster psychological safety to ensure that students do not feel overwhelmed by stress or strain while learning. And that's one of the reasons why we felt implementing trauma-informed practices, which centers basically on safety, trust, empowerment, and inclusion, would motivate students' engagement and learning. Next slide. Basically, our rationale for the study is built on the foundation and based on previous literatures. The trauma-informed practices has a very huge association with increased student resilience and engagement. We also saw from our literature reviews that instructors check-ins and of course mindfulness activities kind of provide a conducive environment and a supportive environment for students to strive, motivating their learning and creating a wonderful environment. So we felt like one of the reasons we took this study was to bridge the gap in knowledge of student daily experiences in the classroom and how these practices we have mentioned, how they kind of rope into kind of influence student perceptions, effectiveness, and how this strengthens classroom motivational climates. As a bit of our conceptual framework, we worked with the music model of motivation. It's a framework developed by Dr. Brett Jones in 2009. And this framework is basically built on 5 components. And these 5 components basically talks about empowerment, usefulness, success, interest, and caring, which forms the acronym music. And for each of these components, it's very important to ensure, or as an instructor, to see how these components can play out in your classrooms. So for empowerment as a component, how are you as an instructor able to empower your students to take autonomy on their learning? How do they find your course content useful to their short-term and long-term goals? And how are you able to prepare their mindsets to always feel that they can succeed if they put in maximum effort? And of course, it's very important that students feel interested in our courses and our study materials when they are kind of engaging. And finally, we also see that students would also do very well or perform maximally when they understand that their instructors care about them and they feel cared by their peers as well. Roping this concept to our trauma-informed practice, we try to see how this reflects. At the far left, you see instructor check-ins and how this instructor check-ins reflects in caring and empowerment. It's just true that when you as an instructor initiate reaching out to your students, it kind of gives them that feelings that you actually care about them. The other part of it, the right part, we looked at the mindfulness practices, trying to see how this reflects in the interest and success components of the music model of academic motivation. And interlapping, we saw that when these two areas comes together, we can see an enhanced classroom motivational climate, which prioritize psychological safety, engagement, and instructional effectiveness. At this point, I'll be handing off to Jess, my colleague, who will be taking us through the intervention processes.
Thank you, Norbert, for the introduction and a little bit about myself. I am, like you all heard from Dr. Dixon, that I am a graduate student here at ETSU and in the psychology department. So I'm very excited to talk about the stats and the methods. So let me jump right into that. This study used a quasi-experimental design with 3 intervention courses and 3 comparison courses. And these courses were across psychology, social work, and education. The intervention included 3 brief mindfulness exercises spaced across the semester. Specifically, we have belly breathing, mindful eating, and Balloon Man. So these were video and script guided. So we watched a video in class and we had a script each of us used to kind of introduce the video, the mindfulness exercise, what it means, and ensuring privacy and participation efforts. But belly breathing specifically focused on slow, guided breathing to support physiological regulation and internal awareness. And then mindful eating, some of them brought their own snacks or we brought snacks for them, but we engaged in mindful eating, which engage external sensory awareness by asking students to notice taste, texture, and smell using an everyday activity like we all eat. And then finally, Balloon Man, around week 10, we incorporated gentle movement and visualization to support embodied awareness and release tension. So kind of covering all of the senses, internal, external, and then movement. These exercises were intentionally short, low stakes, and offered multiple pathways for the regulation. So that way it doesn't impact your teaching content instruction as nearly much as you might think. We also included 3 anonymous online check-ins on D2L for reflection, whether that be on the mindfulness activity itself or where the students are in the class, like what do they need from us, what resources could we provide, things like that. And we did these a week right after each of the exercises and allowed anonymous posting in case, to increase that trustworthiness. Next slide, please. For our methods and data collection, our measures, like Norbert described, we use the music model of motivation inventory. So we collected data using these valid quantitative measures. Motivation, the motivational climate, was assessed using this music model, which captures empowerment, which relates to choice and autonomy, usefulness, which relates to that perceived value of the material, success, which relates to belief and ability to succeed, interest, which relates to engagement with the content, and finally caring, which relates to the feeling of being supported by the instructor. And on top of that, we also measured perceptions of instructor support with the Learning Climate Questionnaire, which assesses the extent to which students experience their instructor as autonomy supportive. And also, we wanted to know like how much information trauma-informed knowledge that the students brought into the class. So we assessed their trauma-informed knowledge at the beginning of the semester with the Trauma-Informed Educational Knowledge Survey, which just captures this familiarity with trauma-informed principles in educational settings. And finally, we did have some open-ended reflection questions, which I will get to a little bit later. Next slide, please. So yeah, moving forward, this was also a pre and post design conducted during the fall 2025 semester. So just last semester, look at us go. Pre-intervention data were collected during weeks 1 through 3 when students completed the music model of motivation inventory in the present tense, reflecting how they felt about the course at that point, along with the trauma-informed educational knowledge survey to kind of gauge how much knowledge and familiarity they had at that point as well, coming into class. Post-intervention data were collected during weeks 13 through 15, and at that time, students completed the music inventory again, but in the past tense, reflecting on their experiences across the semester, as well as the Learning Climate Questionnaire, which captured their perceptions of instructor support by the end of the course. Next slide, please. And here are the additional questions that I said I would get back to. In addition to the standardized measures, we included a few open-ended questions to capture students' lived experiences in the course. For the comparison groups, we asked about relationship building with the instructor, including whether they had an opportunity to build a relationship and an example of a time they felt supported by their instructor. For the intervention group, we asked parallel relationship questions, but also added participation and feedback items about the intervention itself, like how often did they do the mindfulness exercises and check-ins, to which activities they liked the most or least, whether the activities felt helpful or harmful, what challenges came up during participation, and what they would keep or change. These responses gave us context for interpreting the quantitative findings and also helped us understand why certain strategies landed well for some students and not for others. Next slide, please. Oh, you're there. So I'm going to jump into the data analysis and results. So for quantitative data analysis and for our main research question, we first examined changes in motivational climate using a 2x2 ANOVA, comparing pre and post scores across intervention and comparison courses. We did not find significant group by time interactions or main effects across these subscales. However, both the intervention and comparison groups reported relatively high scores on the items related to that relationship building from the start, suggesting that there may have been limited room for growth and making it a little harder to detect differences over time and across groups. Next slide. Thank you. And then we had some secondary questions. So for one of these secondary questions, we looked at the perceptions of instructor with simple linear regression analyses. When doing so, a different pattern emerged. Scores on the Learning Climate Questionnaire significantly predicted motivation across all of the 5 music dimensions. So in short, the more autonomy, supportive, and caring students perceived their instructor to be, the more motivated they felt across each area of empowerment, usefulness, success, interest, and caring. So that was a really cool finding. Additionally, for another of our secondary research questions, we looked at students' trauma-informed educational knowledge with simple linear regression analyses as well. When doing so, we found that students' trauma-informed educational knowledge, like to begin the semester, did not significantly predict these subscales, the motivational climate. And this might suggest that awareness or familiarity with trauma-informed principles alone was not enough to influence motivation without corresponding experiences in the classroom. Next slide, please. And finally, just as an exploratory question, we decided to analyze the difference of the specific elements or questions of the motivational climate over time across pre and post. So comparing pre and post using independent samples t-tests, we found 2 items that related to perceived success, and they did show significant increases from the beginning to the end of the semester. Students reported feeling more capable of earning a high grade and more confident in their ability to succeed on coursework by the end of the course, regardless of group, which is always a great thing. So we succeeded and they felt successful. So those are all of the results for the quantitative analyses, but there's still more in terms of qualitative data. So I'm going to hand over the microphone to Laura to explain our process there.
Special thanks to Jess for picking up there. You may have noticed in the beginning, and I should have said we have a team of 4. So our colleague Tiffany Bonnagio could not join us today. And so thank you to Jess for picking up her portion of the presentation. But yes, we did do some qualitative analysis as well. And Norbert and I are going to tell you about that. We did some content analysis of the responses to the open-ended question. And they really fell into 2 categories around instructors and then around mindfulness. And so several themes emerged. I'm going to tell you a bit about the instructors. Regardless of group, students felt supported and cared for by their instructors. I included a quote there. I could tell they cared about mine as well as others' academic success. They took the time to learn our names quickly, talk about common things, etc. A second theme was that some students built relationships with instructors and some did not, but all felt welcomed. So they all felt like they could have built a relationship with the instructor. That opportunity was there. They may not have taken advantage of that for any variety of reasons, but it wasn't because that there was some wall or barrier preventing them. Students reported and valued that instructors were positive, responsive, and communicative. I like this quote as well. My instructor takes great care in making their classroom an open and collaborative area. Because of this, I feel as though they support and value my opinions and thoughts. And then finally, and I must say this is my favorite, multiple times students mentioned that humor and jokes played an important role. So they appreciated, and who doesn't, the opportunity to have a giggle or laugh or for maybe people to be a little silly or not take themselves so seriously. And so I hope that it's a takeaway for you that, take advantage of time opportunities to be a little funny in class. And that seems to go a long way with that perception of instructor. Norbert's going to tell you about our next category.
Thank you, Laurel. For the mindfulness practices, we also saw that 4 teams kind of emerged. And across this team, the first talked about reactions to mindfulness exercise. These were mixed. So one of our students kind of stated, and I quote, the activity helped me to relax and quiet my brain a bit. However, this activity was a bit too long and got me a bit burdened with it at the end. The second team was many enjoyed the activities and found them calming and relaxing. One of the students stated that I felt like they helped improve my mental well-being. Many students reported trouble focusing, which of course, that's a normal thing for students to focus during activities. And most of them felt a bit distracted in group setting. And for one of the students, I think the quote was that the main problem I had was other students being disruptive. Students also enjoyed the interactive activities in class, whether they were mindfulness or educational. They couldn't always tell the difference, but what they always wanted was they wanted these engaging exercises to continue. One of the students said, and I quote, I enjoyed the activities because it kept me engaged. Next slide, please. For our strength and limitation from the studies, we saw a very good participation with over 150 students participating in the research, both in the control and intervention group. And one of the strengths we found is that our campus is pretty trauma-informed. However, there were no differences between the control and intervention classes. So basically, for the experiences of the comparison in the group's teaching were a bit not different because most of the courses the students took were from the College of Social Sciences, and there were no philosophical diversity. One of this of the strength was that most of the instructors who participated in the studies were graduate assistants, so they were fully invested in the studies. And it could also serve as a bias or a limitation because they didn't have a lot to do with juggling with other courses. So this offered them ample time to dedicate enough attention to the exercises and of course student check-ins. Finally, we offered student check-ins and no one pretty took advantage of them. However, there were lots of informal check-ins before and after classes, and we made very substantial engagements with students across groups. And I would be handing over to Jess to take us through the recommendations and the recommendation strategies.
Thank you, Norbert. So taken together, these quantitative and qualitative findings suggest that the perception of the instructor was the most influential factor shaping motivational climate. Trauma-informed teaching may improve motivation primarily through how students experience their instructors rather than through student knowledge or isolated activities alone. So therefore, let's work on this, right, as instructors. So on the next slide, I've listed some of the main strategies that may increase instructor perception. Next slide, please. Thank you. So based on our results, as well as prior literature, trauma-informed strategies that improve positive instructor perception include being transparent and predictable to further increase this trustworthiness, supporting autonomy without lowering expectations or standards, so providing students choice and ability to collaborate with you with the course, but again, not lowering those core standards, showing relational presence and responsiveness. So this connection, this caring, the availability you have for your students. And then also creating emotionally supportive classroom and climates, like being warm, being calm, and having appropriate humor, having a little fun. Um, and ultimately, the fifth one is just signaling this care early on through the syllabus language that you use and your first interactions. So that syllabus day is crucial. Um, and these practices map closely onto the six guiding values of trauma-informed care, which are safety, trust and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and attention to sociocultural influences. And many of these strategies are things instructors are already doing. So I'd love to hear from you. What trauma-informed practices do you use, and which of the six guiding values do you think they support most strongly? That concludes our presentation, so I open it for questions.
I will stop sharing our slides, which of course we will share with you, and I will post that question in the chat.
So
As
Jess,
soon
you
as
want folks to share with you the strategies? That was a
Yeah.
rhetorical question.
Yeah, no, seriously. What strategies do you all use in your everyday practice, and how do they line up with the trauma-informed values?
Maybe you can have that slide on so we see those strategies, and maybe like it would be like a little cheat piece.
I just put it in the chat.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Wally, go ahead.
So I will say that I attempt to use strategies, and sometimes they don't work. Like I've noticed a significant generational difference in what counts as humor. And it's like, and for a while I had children who were the same age as my students, but even my children have outgrown the students' ages these days, and so I never know what's funny and what's not funny, and so it feels like I fail more frequently than I succeed when I try to use humor in the classroom. I wonder if you have any response to that.
I have lots of responses. I identify with that. I mean, I can share my own trauma with you about the time where I referenced O.J. Simpson in class and absolutely no one knew what I was talking about. Yeah, so yeah, maybe we're trying to be cute or funny or silly or engaging, but really we're corny or cliched or dull. Um, yeah, I think maybe effort is more useful than impact, I mean, certainly avoiding things that are inappropriate, but maybe attempting or having a sense of humor about oneself.
Yeah, if you don't mind me jumping in, I am also closer in age to the students now, and even the jokes I pull are so old, and I'm like, I feel so lame. But then that's what it is, like you said, Laura, the intention. Like they can see you're trying and you're there, you're present. I remember in one of my classes I was doing a cha-cha slide dance, like slide to the left, slide to the right to indicate with physical my body as like the positive and negative skew in distributions. So it's all just the effort and the joy that you put into it is what I've noticed.
Deb.
Actually, Wally, that is such a great question that I've almost forgotten my question. But one of the things I'm teaching a course in our graduate trauma and resilience certificate this block and having students share all sorts of things unasked for and figuring out how to best respond to them. And so far, I've done a lot of, thanking them for honoring me, for feeling that I'm a safe enough presence to share that kind of information with. And I'd be curious to hear how others address that as well. But my other one, I have too, is AI. And that one I'm still trying to figure out is a trauma-informed approach to AI. And I'm leaning towards giving students guidelines and boundaries. So with trustworthiness and transparency, being open about what I like, what I will and will not allow, but also wanting to allow them some empowerment, voice, and choice, because a lot of the software nowadays, like grammar, Microsoft, even Word will adjust your grammar. So it's hard to figure out the balance between autonomy, or yeah, empowerment, voice, and choice, and the boundaries of where I want to have what I want them to be able to do and not do in the classroom.
Yes, please make your choices, but not that. I don't have good advice for that balance. I teach social work, so I do walk the path of um, being someone that folks often see as a person that they can share some private things from their path. And I'm with you. Like, thank you for honoring me and trusting me. And is this, um, is there something in particular you want me to know about this? Is this something that you want to experience listening? Is this something that you want to experience action? Um, I try to focus that as well because I've had students in my office like, well, you're a social worker. I should be able to tell you this. And I have to be like, well, but I'm not your social worker. And if you would like a social worker, let's put that together for you in a way that can really be supportive for you because I'm your teacher. And so I think kind of setting those roles and boundaries is helpful too. And I think, and I maybe you all have seen this too, that when we're in the classroom, we're modeling those roles first. And so that syllabus day, I love that Jess brought that up. Syllabus day, syllabus week. Oh, we don't learn anything this day. No, you learn like the most important things this day about, how this class is going to be. And what sometimes we are going to poke parts of you that are uncomfortable to get poked. And so here are some resources on the front end that you can utilize if those places get poked. And while this is a safe space or as safe as I can make it for you to be brave and share things, you're under no obligation to share personal things here. And if you do feel motivated to share personal things, it might not be the best place for that. And so how can I help you set up some boundaries as far as when you're sharing how to seek support and seek support appropriately that will move forward your healing rather than be, oh, I let all the toothpaste out of the tube in my last class. And I wish I had maybe negotiated sharing personal information differently. So trying to set those expectations in the beginning as well.
Thanks, that's useful. I should also mention I'm teaching online too, asynchronous online,
Oh,
not in the class, not face to face, which also lends another layer of complexity to the teaching.
gosh, I'd love to follow up with you on that because I struggle with that too, teaching asynchronous online when I'm also used to, I'm old school. I'm used to being like all up in your business, walking around the class, like you can't hide from me. And now, like you can hide online, and I don't know what to do with that. So I'm not your gal. Michelle, you want to weigh in on this?
Well, no, I just want to make sure Jess saw the chat. We have a testimonial, so I don't know if someone wants to read it out loud.
Yeah, I was reading that. Aw, thank you so much, Allison. Allison is a student in my class right now, and just shared that uh, she could see my implementation of these in the class so far, even though we've had like, what, 2 meetings in 3 weeks. So thank you so much, Allison. That is so kind, and I really appreciate that.
I'll say one thing in response to Deb's other question. And we're in no person's land right now with regard to AI. We are charting out the boundaries, and based on how in my department's meetings, when we have meetings about AI, based on my faculty, my co-faculty's responses to my comments, I may be the only one with this view. But my view is that you have to assume that students are going to use AI in all the places that you don't want them to use it. And so you have to adjust your teaching accordingly with the assumption that they're going to have that available. And so what I think, and I use AI all the time now, and I find out places where they use the term hallucinate. I just prefer to say it's wrong. It makes up stuff or it's wrong about stuff. Using what we can teach them is the human supervision of AI. And that's where we're the only people who can do that. AI, well, maybe they can. AI can be the human supervisor of AI use. But I'm on a path to figuring out how to, we still have to teach, we're still responsible for teaching, thinking, and critical thinking, and weighing evidence and looking for alternative explanations of things. We still are obligated to do that. And we now have AI to help with that. And the challenge, I think, and we're going to find this is the same thing that happened when calculators came on the stage in 1978. It's the same thing where a lot of people banned calculators in the classroom. And now you don't even use a calculator anymore because it's embedded in everything you do everywhere you go. And so that my view is, how can I adapt my life to teach in a way that assumes that students are going to use AI in a way that maximizes students' experiences in the classroom, using all the guidance that Jess and others have provided.
Thanks, Wally. Angela.
Hi there. So this isn't really related to teaching style per se because I don't yet or currently teach any courses, although I may do that coming up next academic year. But I noticed in one of the slides you said ETSU is already pretty trauma informed, so maybe the improvement was less as a result or something like that. I'm sort of paraphrasing.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I would just be curious, sort of as someone who's, stepping into a leadership role at the SBI and understanding sort of the infusion of trauma-informed classes, coursework, and methods across ETSU. What sort of measures are you using to sort of say that it's pretty trauma-informed? Like, is that an objective measure, a subjective measure? Like, how do we know that ETSU is pretty trauma-informed?
We don't. But we can say that when we put together this study, we asked our colleagues to be the comparison classes, and we asked the people that we know who have been in some of the same faculty meetings as us, some of the same trainings as us, some of the same, they may be SBI members. And so we couldn't really say, other than we were impressed with the trauma-informed knowledge baseline of the students that was higher than we expected it to be. So that's why we kind of made some general statements that there may not have been much difference because the teachers that were our comparison groups were already people who come to the same trainings as we do.
Ah, okay. And then it's interesting. And then so that survey, I Googled it a little bit while I'm sort of in transit, so I'm having to be careful about the Googling. But that trauma-informed knowledge survey assessment, I'd never heard of that before. So that's pretty interesting. And I may dig in a little bit more, but are there studies that show sort of baseline trauma knowledge across university settings by students?
We asked that same question. Jess, do you want to take that one?
I think this was Tiffany did some research, if I recall correctly. She looked across articles, and the majority of the ones that had this kind of this average were in let's see, I think it was a faculty rather than the students themselves. So there's quite little research on like general kind of baseline knowledge, trauma-informed knowledge across, students.
Mm, interesting. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think there's just pockets. I mean, we have some of our university partners across the country. There are pockets of pieces of universities that have integrated into their curriculums and different in social work or psychology or other health fields. And so, but I don't know that we have that data in any accessible way. The state did the Building Strong Brains, which is really how the SBI came into being, with some small projects where folks got grants and they, brought it into ETSU to bring ACEs knowledge. I mean, I'm using that as proxy, trauma informed care. There's a little bit of difference, but still that same kind of idea. So it is a really complex. What do people know? How did they hear about it? Question in the university. So yeah, it's an open question. I also had the wondering, because it wasn't part of your study, but when we do implementation, we meaning the centers of excellence, we do implementation with therapists who are doing different trauma interventions. And one of the things that we often ask them is, how was doing this changed you? And kind of what your work was like. And so I was also curious, like, even if you know about it, if you're in the position of being an instructor and doing it, like, how did that change them? And that wasn't part of your study, but that, it just made me curious too, because that's a ripple effect of trauma-informed work too.
Yes. I This was another step on my journey for me as an instructor, because I would say the person in the classroom 13 years ago is different than the person in the classroom now. And, I regret some of the things that I did that were not trauma informed in the beginning, really being a stickler on due dates and deadlines and, um, things that really didn't build their skills or competence. And this was very much another step in that direction of, I want the students to walk out of the classroom and for their memory to be, my instructor cared about me more than I need them to be able to rattle off the walking around facts that I imparted. And so this was a step for me.
I just put a shameless plug in the chat. Colleagues and I developed a tool based on the Missouri model, which is a model that's might commonly used to become trauma informed, to show the process of being trauma informed, and we developed it specifically for higher education. So we are trying to get individuals and staff at different institutions to answer this survey. So if you are faculty or staff at higher ed, I would love it if you would, and haven't done the survey yet. Some of you probably, I think, have already done it, but if you haven't, I'd encourage you to do it. So we are looking forward to, at some point, getting a large enough data set so we can actually test the efficacy of the model to see, does the process hold together. But like I said, it is based on a model that's been commonly used in practice. So thank you for allowing me to do that shameless plug.
Love it, Deb. We're glad that you've been part of a connection with SBI for a lot of years now. Laura, I just wanted to respond to you and all of us being trauma informed in our work and our lives is like such a journey, and that it is really challenging when we learn better, we do better, but then we also have that kind of self-reflection that like, yikes, this is what I did before I knew. And I think that's really an important piece to support people in too. Like you do better when you know better, and you can't hold yourself, to the standard where you feel guilty about everything you did. And I learned from colleagues who are in the sex offender treatment, adolescent sex offender treatment, and they were talking about like what they were teaching and training and doing 25 years ago that is like really horrific if we look at through it now. And at that time it was best practices, and they stand up and share that as like that's what we knew. And oh my gosh, in reflection, that's horrible. And we're still at it trying to do better for kids. And so I just think that's really important to support all of us as we do the journey, that we're not going to do it perfect, and that we just learn and grow and support each other, along the way.
Yeah, I think maybe part of learning and maybe part of being trauma informed and maybe together is the showing of grace with students and with myself. Um, have you ever planned a lesson that just like flops? And when that happens, I stand up in front of the students and I say, I feel like this is really flopping. I had really amazing plans here that are not turning out how I wanted them to be. So, can you help me make a turn here so we can use the rest of this time to be meaningful for you? And so just modeling like, hey, I'm going to mess up too. And then when I'm moving through my teaching, always asking myself, is this boundary, is this expectation that I'm setting in support of student learning? Or is it fulfilling some other need that I have to be relevant or to be important or to be in control, or sort of hitting on those things and asking myself that, okay, why am I feeling like I need to do this thing right now? And making sure that I'm centering it back on what really is best for student learning here, knowing that I'm going to still screw that up too. So I think the showing of grace is important.
And I'd like to add that that taps into a whole system of practice that we have in higher ed, where in some places you feel comfortable to make mistakes, and if you make a mistake, you feel comfortable to tell your class, "Hey, I just made a mistake and I really screwed that up." In some environments, though, that's not there, and so especially with junior faculty who are working on tenure and promotion, don't want to admit making a mistake or don't feel that they are comfortable admitting a mistake, and so that kind of depends on the administrative um, uh, cultures, the system, how willing they are. And I know that many of us are working on that constantly. But yeah, there's a whole, as much as you might want to admit that you made an error and use that as a learning opportunity for your students, which is brilliant. At the same time, if any of those students give you bad reviews, you may, if you're not tenured now, you may not use that in the future. You may not do that in the future.
I feel that a lot, especially as a graduate student. I don't even have a teaching career quite like yet, not an official one. So, but I just brave it anyways. I remember I made like a huge mistake in one of my classes, one of my like stats class of if my numbers were off, so the whole thing went bonkers. And so I just told my students, hey, let's just throw that paper away. We're gonna redo this the next day. I made a mistake. I'm gonna fix it. And like, I apologize for the brain confusion and everything. Um, and I just found like students are so much more responsive towards you if you do admit that you make mistakes and that you're going. And what's more important is that you're gonna take the steps to fix it and to grow in that case. And so I do feel that pressure though as a graduate student teaching here, like what if they write something bad about me? But I've just gotten to the point where I'm like, you know what? It's overall, it's best for them. It's what helps them be more comfortable in the environment and able to make mistakes. We always talk about how failure is not a bad thing. Failure is just one step forward towards success, and we learn from failure more than straight success. So, yeah, just be brave is my message there.
I think you're right. Authenticity is a risk. Carrie?
So I'm curious, how folks are, and maybe our grad students can weigh in on this, how you are, for students that you know are maybe going to go on to graduate studies, incorporating both flexibility and preparing them for the realities of their future employment. So I'm thinking, as a speech pathologist, there are deadlines for when documentation is due. And, there are in that environment, I want to support my students' learning. And so, building flexibility is important. And at the same time, I also want to help build a sense of understanding that life includes things like deadlines, and it includes times when when things must be done. So have you had any ways in which you've helped your students to understand that and still helped them also then to maintain that connection? Because it's not that I want to be like, I want them to be engaged. I want them to be motivated, but I also know what they're going to need to be able to do as a professional.
Do you mind if I pipe in first? So, as a graduate instructor, I like Dr. Dixon had mentioned before, like I am all involved in the Center for Teaching Excellence. I go to as many things as I possibly can, and I've learned a lot about like alternative grading styles and things like that. But one thing that really stuck with me in my teaching are grace periods. Like I'll set a deadline, but then you have like 3 days, a week of no penalty, of getting it in after that deadline. So it's kind of like two deadlines, if you will, just in case things happen, because we know we want to give that flexibility that lives like life goes on and things happen, but also there are deadlines and these you need to, keep your time management skills and kind of keep this focus and keep you on track. So I've noticed that a lot of my students really love the grace periods, even if it's just a day. 3 days is a really good one too. I've noticed for my personal teaching style and how I grade and that process, but I've even done up to a week, and it hasn't really made a huge, uh, it wasn't an obstacle in my case for grading, but then again, I'm only teaching one course, but I'll definitely keep trying whenever I teach more down the line.
I could weigh in a little bit. I'm a graduate assistant for development, teaching assistant development at the Center for Teaching Excellence. So I practically don't teach, but I think from the knowledge I've gathered and from most of the activities and offerings I've attended, I feel like setting the expectation at the beginning of the semester is very ideal. So students get to know what is expected of them prior to those deadlines. And also, I also believe that if we have activities or assignments that would kind of trigger students' interest, because most times for us as students, particularly I'm speaking from my own point of view, we know the difference between instructions or practice that has kind of impacts on our short-term and long-term goals. And we also know practices or instructions that just seem like busy work. So there's a need for clarity between busy work and something that is of utmost interest to students. Thank you.
Thank you, Norbert. I think I lean on the 6 guiding values too. So when I'm setting due dates with students, a lot of times I'll say, okay, so I've set this due here because you have to build on this. And if I were you, I would want 2 weeks after getting that back to be able to incorporate that into the next one. I can take this later, but then I can't promise you good feedback in time for you to incorporate it into the next thing. Or I'll say something like, okay, I'm scheduling this due here because if I were you, I wouldn't want to go to spring break with this hanging over my head. However, if there are those of you who are like, okay, professor, I'm going to need that time on spring break to finish this, let's do that. So, empowering them to have choice and also being transparent, like, this is why I put the due date here, not because like I'm twisting my mustache and trying to make life difficult. And so can we like mutually come to a place where this meets all of our goals and really supports your learning? What I most want you to do is to maximize your learning here. So how can we do that realistically? So I do find those 6 guiding values to be a center to that balance. Thank you for asking that.
I was going to just mention briefly Carrie's comment about deadlines, and there are specific things that do have deadlines, right? Like if you don't pay your taxes by a certain time, you get penalties. And I saw somebody put a concept of penalties in the chat. So what I try and do is scaffold, put things in place so that students can meet a deadline in a timely fashion, and remind them that it's their life and they're planning things, but I'm going to try and make sure that they've got all the tools and knowledge they need so they can accomplish this in a timely fashion. And it's easy to do, easier, I think, in an online class than it is in face-to-face because I can build it into the template and it's already there. But I was just thinking about deadlines, that deadlines are true. We do have deadlines and there are consequences if you can't meet them. So how can we use a trauma-informed approach to deadlines?
I mean, I think part of it is the transparency of those penalties. My sort of policy in my class is if you ask me for extra time ahead of time, you get it. If you hand something in late, it's 5% deduction per day, which means at the end of 20 days, if I haven't heard from you, if we're not doing anything about this, that opportunity is over because now you're down to 0. And I try to build a lot of things in. So you hand in 12 journals, but we only count 10. You do 12 quizzes, we only count 10. You can have a bad week. To build in grace and some choice, and folks can sort of manage their life on their own. And then when those are hard deadlines versus, I guess, a due date, I say, you're going to have this final in because I have to have final grades in. And so that's not something you and I have control over. So, trying to be mindful of that. And can I back map some dates to scaffold you into that?
Laura, we have come up to our time. We do, echoing Julia in the chat, Norbert, Laura, and Jessica, we really appreciate the work that you did, but also taking the time to put this together and share it and support this conversation with the community. So thank you again. Thanks for everyone who came. We do have a feedback questionnaire in the chat. If you can give us your thoughts, really value your opinions. Lisa has put other opportunities to come to the Resilience Series presentation. So we hope you'll join us again. So again, thank you everyone. Great discussion. Bye-bye.